The key turned on the first try. I stood on that porch for a long moment with my hand still on the brass, because the last time I had stood there, my key would not turn at all. My mother had changed the locks while I was kneeling at my grandmother's grave. She stuffed my clothes into yard sale bags, set them out by the railing like donations, and listed the house I had spent $116,560 keeping out of foreclosure. Here is what she did not know. The deed she used to take that house carried a notary stamp that had been legally dead for 8 months before it ever touched paper, and the daughter she locked out reads deeds for a living. I examine property titles. I find forged documents before they cost innocent people their homes. 14 months after she took my keys, I finally examined the document she used against me, and I took back every square foot, lawfully, in writing, with her own paperwork as the rope. My name is Nadia Brennan. I am 36 years old, and if you have ever been the one who stayed, the one who paid, the one who showed up every single first of the month, and still got locked out anyway, then this story is going to feel familiar in a way I am sorry about. If that was you, do me one favor before we start. Type the word key in the comments. Just that, one word. I read every single one, and I want to know how many of us there are. And if stories like this one matter to you, the subscribe button costs nothing. My mother taught me that nothing free is ever really free. She was wrong about that too. To understand the morning of the locks, you have to go back 12 years before it. One jump. That is the only one we will make, I promise. And from there, we will walk forward together, straight back to that porch. 12 years before the morning of the locks, my grandmother Ruth had a stroke in her kitchen on Delmore Avenue, on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. She was 74. She was reaching for the coffee tin on the second shelf, and her left hand simply stopped answering her. She sat down on the linoleum, arranged her housecoat over her knees, and waited 40 minutes for the mail carrier to notice her through the storm door. That was Ruth. She would not even have an emergency without tidying up for it first. I was 24. I was 2 semesters into a culinary program on the other side of town, working nights, sharing an apartment with 2 roommates and a mouse we had all agreed not to discuss. When the hospital called, I did not think. I packed 1 duffel bag, and I moved into the back bedroom of the house on Delmore Avenue, the room with the radiator that knocked like a visitor all winter. I want to be honest with you about why. It was not sainthood. Ruth raised me. My mother, Carol, had me at 19 and handed me to Ruth at 21. The way you hand someone a plant you keep forgetting to water. Ruth was the one who signed my report cards. Ruth was the one who taught me that you write down every dollar that leaves your hand in ink in a notebook. Because, and she said this with a straight face every time, paper has a better memory than people. She kept hers in a drawer by the stove. When I moved in, I bought my own. A plain spiral notebook, 99 cents. Blue cover. Remember that notebook. It is going to matter more than anything else in this story. My mother came to the hospital exactly once during those first weeks. She arrived with her second husband, Dale, a man who sold gutters and rainwater systems and referred to himself, unprompted, as an entrepreneur. Carol stood at the foot of Ruth's bed for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I watched the wall clock the whole time, waiting for her to say something to her own mother. Instead, she looked around the room, at the machines, at the get well cards, and then she looked at me and said the sentence I would hear from her for the next decade. It all stays in the family. She said it, the way other people say amen. And then she took Ruth's car keys off the bedside table, the keys to a 9-year-old Buick, and said the car should come to her place for safekeeping. Ruth was awake. Ruth watched her do it. Ruth said nothing, and I learned later that Ruth's silences were never surrender. They were bookkeeping. That Buick never came back. 6 weeks later, Dale sold it, and nobody ever saw a dollar of it. And when I asked, Carol smiled with all the warmth of a filing cabinet and said the sentence again. It all stays in the family. I was 24. I still thought the sentence included me. Hold on to that thought, because the entire rest of this story is about the day I found out exactly who that sentence was for. Ruth came home from the rehabilitation center that spring with a cane she hated and a left hand that worked at about half strength. She could sign her name slowly. If the pen was thick enough, she could not drive, could not carry groceries, could not be left alone overnight. So I stayed. The culinary program let me defer for a year. Then the year turned into another year, the way years do when nobody is paying attention to yours. 8 years before the morning of the locks, they made their first attempt, and I did not recognize it as an attempt until much later. It was Thanksgiving. Carol and Dale arrived with a store-bought pie and a manila envelope, and after the plates were cleared, Dale slid the envelope across the table to Ruth like he was doing her a kindness. Power of attorney paperwork, he explained, just in case. Documents. So the family could handle her affairs if anything ever happened, so nobody would have to bother the courts, so it would all stay. You know the rest of the sentence by now. My grandmother wiped her good hand on her napkin, took the papers, and read them, all of them, at the table, in silence. It took 10 straight minutes, and it was the best television I have ever watched. Dale kept starting sentences, and Ruth kept not looking up. When she finished, she squared the pages, slid them back across the table, and said, I already have my affairs handled by someone who was here in February. That was the whole speech. Nobody at that table needed to ask what happened in February, because the answer was doctor's appointments, and the answer was me. Carol's face did something I had never seen it do. Just for a second, the sincerity slipped, and underneath it was arithmetic. She recovered, laughed her hostess laugh, and said Mom was so funny, and they left before the pie was cut. In the kitchen afterward, Ruth handed me the dishes to dry and said, quietly, without turning around, they'll be back with different paper. I remember laughing. I remember saying, Grandma, come on. They're lazy, not criminal. She handed me another plate. She was right. Of course. She was right about the paper. Right that it would be different. Right that it would come back. The only thing my grandmother got wrong was the timing. They did not come back while she could still read. 7 years and 10 months before the morning of the locks. I can be that exact. And by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why the real trouble started. And it started the way it always does. Quietly. On paper. On paper. Ruth's late husband had a pension, and one afternoon a letter arrived, saying the fund had been restructured. That is a soft word for a hard thing. Her monthly check dropped by almost half. The house on Delmore Avenue still had a mortgage on it. My grandfather had refinanced it years earlier to pay for his own last illness. And suddenly, the numbers did not reach. The bank wanted $1,240 a month. Ruth's check could now cover barely half of that, and half of a mortgage payment is worth exactly nothing to a bank. I called my mother. I want you to hear this part clearly, because when this story ends, you are going to remember this phone call. I sat at Ruth's kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of me, and I asked Carol and Dale, 2 adults with a paid-off condo and a boat named after a cocktail, to help cover their own mother's house. There was a pause on the line, long enough to pour a drink in. Then Carol said, Nadia, honey, We can't set money on fire. Mom should think about assisted living. We'd handle everything. It all stays in the family. We'd handle everything. I have thought about that sentence for 10 years. At the time I heard laziness. It was not laziness. It was a plan without a date on it. Yet, so I picked up the payment myself. $1,240. On the first of every month. I was a 28-year-old culinary school dropout, and I want to be honest with you about what that number did to my life. Because this is the part people skip. That payment was my tuition. Gone. That payment was my 20s. I worked a catering job on weekends, and I needed something steady with daytime hours. And the county. I will always be grateful for this accident. The county was hiring. The Franklin County Recorder's Office. If you have never heard of a recorder's office, it is the building where every deed, every mortgage, every lien in the county gets stamped, scanned, and stored forever. It is the county's memory. I took a data entry job there, a few months into those payments, because it paid decent money and let me be home by 5:30 to make Ruth's dinner. I thought it was a placeholder job. It turned out to be the whole story. Life does that. It hands you the weapon years before it shows you the war. My first week, I was drowning. Documents came across my desk in a language I did not speak. Quitclaim deeds, easements, satisfactions of mortgage. On day 4, I misfiled something and sat there trying not to cry into a scanner. And the woman at the next desk rolled her chair over without a word and fixed it in about 9 seconds. Her name was Yolanda. She had worked in that office for 22 years. She had reading glasses on a beaded chain and a coffee mug that said World's Okest Grandma, and she became, though neither of us said so out loud for years, the closest thing I had to a second mother. Yolanda taught me how to read a deed, the way Ruth had taught me to read a recipe, what order things happen in, what ruins, the whole dish. And one afternoon, when I told her a little about my family, just a little, just the shape of it, she took off her reading glasses, looked at me over the beaded chain, and said the one line I have carried ever since. I did not know that day how far I would end up carrying it. She said, "People lie, baby. Paper just waits. Write that down somewhere. People lie. Paper just waits." Everything that happens at the end of this story is that sentence coming true. So that became my life. And I am not going to pretend it was misery, because it was not. Mornings, I drove to the county building and filed other people's paperwork. Evenings, I cooked dinner for a woman who told the same 6 stories on a loop and made every one of them land. First of every month, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the payment into the blue spiral notebook. In ink, the way Ruth taught me. Date, amount, town, confirmation number from the bank transfer. $1,240. Line after line after line. Year after year. Ruth would watch me do it from her chair. And once, only once, she put her good hand on the page and said, "This book is worth more than the house, Nadia. One day, you'll see why." I thought she meant it sentimentally. Ruth did not do sentimental. Ruth did instructions. If you have ever taken care of a parent or a grandparent, really taken care of them, the version with pill organizers and shower rails, and 3 a.m. false alarms, then you already know something the rest of my family never learned. You know, that caregiving is invisible from the outside. From the outside, I was the granddaughter who lived rent-free at Grandma's. That is the phrase Dale used at a cookout 7 years before the morning of the locks, loud enough for me to hear over the grill. Living rent-free. I was paying more to stay in that house than he paid to live anywhere in his entire life. But I said nothing. I wrote my numbers in my notebook, and the notebook said nothing either. Paper just waits. Now I need to tell you about the will, because everything my mother did afterward was war against one piece of paper. 5 years before the morning of the locks, Ruth had a health scare, her heart this time, an irregular rhythm that put her in the hospital for 4 nights. And when she came home, she was quiet for a week in a way that worried me more than the hospital had. Then one Tuesday, she put on her good coat and told me to drive her downtown. She had made an appointment with a lawyer on her own, from the phone in her bedroom. She did not invite my opinion, and she certainly did not invite Carol's. She signed a will in that office with 2 of the lawyer's staff as witnesses. Everything done properly. Everything boring, which in my line of work is the highest compliment a document can receive. In the car afterwards, she told me what it said, staring straight ahead at the traffic like she was reading it off the windshield. The house on Delmore Avenue would come to me. There was a savings account, modest, that would be split between Carol and me, and her wedding ring would go to my half-brother, Carol and Dale's son, a kid 15 years younger than me who used to ride his bike over on Saturdays, just to sit with Ruth and lose at cards. Ruth loved that boy. That matters later. I started to say something in the car, and Ruth raised her good hand and stopped me. "It is not a gift," she said. "It is a receipt." Then she turned on the radio, and we never discussed it again. Somebody told my mother. I never found out who, and it stopped mattering. What I know is that 2 Thanksgivings later, Carol stood in Ruth's kitchen, holding a dish towel she had not used, and announced to the room, in the tone of a weather report, "Well, of course the house stays in the family no matter what any paper says. It all stays in the family." And she looked at me when she said the word paper. That was the first time the sentence ever sounded like what it actually was. Not a promise, a warning. Stay with me now, because this next part is where it turns. And I need you to notice a Tuesday, 2 years before the morning of the locks, in early spring. Ruth had her second stroke. Smaller, the doctor said, but it took her speech down to single words, and it took her signing hand entirely. She could squeeze my fingers. She could say yes and no, and, on good days, my name. She could not hold a pen. I want you to file that fact away, where you keep important things. From that spring onward, my grandmother could not physically sign her own name. Remember the Tuesday. Remember the hand. That same spring, Dale started coming around. 16 years of allergy to that house. Suddenly cured. He would show up in the middle of a weekday while I was at the county building, let himself in with Carol's old key, and take Ruth on what he called errands. Our neighbor across the street, a retired school teacher who missed nothing and forgave less, mentioned it to me almost in passing. Your stepfather took Ruthie out again Tuesday. Bank. Looked like. She came home tired. I asked Ruth about it that night. She looked at me for a long moment and said 1 word. She said, "Paper." I thought she was asking for the notebook. I brought it to her, and she pushed it away with her good hand, frustrated, and I felt terrible and let it go. I let it go. Of all the things I have forgiven myself for, that one took the longest. Around that same time, this is the last seed, and then the storm. Dale threw one of his backyard business mixers, and I got roped into dropping off a folding table. I was there maybe 10 minutes, but I heard him introduce one of his poker buddies to somebody as my guy for paperwork. He used to be a notary. He can still make things official. Everybody laughed. A notary, if you have never needed one, is a person the state licenses to watch you sign something and stamp it, so the world can trust you were really in the room. Really you, really willing. That stamp is the whole job. The words "used to be a notary" should have gone through me like cold water. Instead, I put down the folding table and went home and made dinner. You do not clock the gun in the first act. when you are busy carrying the groceries. 6 weeks before the morning of the locks on a Tuesday. Her day, I suppose. Ruth died in her sleep at 7:10 in the morning. I know the time because I was the one who found her. And the first thing I saw was her alarm clock. And the numbers just went into me, the way numbers always do. She was 86. She was still holding the television remote, which would have embarrassed her. So I put it on the nightstand before I called anyone. Then I sat on the edge of her bed for a while, in the quiet, in the house I had carried on my back for 7 years and 10 months. And I said thank you to the person who taught me that paper. Has a better memory than people. At the funeral, my mother wept beautifully. I mean, that as a technical observation. It was proportioned. It was audible. It was positioned near the aisle. Afterward, at the repast, between accepting condolences, she squeezed my arm and said, "Don't worry about anything, sweetheart. It all stays in the family." Then she asked me, smiling gently in front of witnesses, whether I had a spare key to the house, since I would be so busy grieving. I said the spare was in the kitchen drawer. That was true. What I did not know was why she wanted to know where every key was. I kept living in the house because it was my home, and I kept paying the mortgage because the bank does not observe mourning periods. On the first of the month, I sat at Ruth's kitchen table alone for the first time and wrote the payment into the blue notebook. $1,240, the 94th line. I remember thinking the will would take a few months to work through the courts, and then the house would be mine on paper, the way it had been mine. In fact, for years. And the notebook could finally retire to the drawer by the stove, next to Ruth's. The notebook did not retire. 5 weeks later, the notebook went to war. The morning of the locks was a Saturday. Here is that morning, minute by minute, because I have replayed it enough times to give you a tour. 9:40 a.m. I came back from the grocery store with 2 paper bags, coffee, eggs, a chuck roast I was going to cook the way Ruth did, low and slow, as a kind of private memorial. I parked in the driveway I had shoveled for 12 winters. I noticed, without noticing, that the porch light was on in broad daylight. 9:41. My key would not go into the lock. Would not turn. Would not enter. I did that thing everyone does. Pulled it out, stared at it, tried again, as if the key had merely forgotten. Then I saw the brass. The lock was new. It was bright in a way nothing else on that old door was bright. A cheap shine, hardware store fresh. I looked at it, and my whole body understood before my mind agreed to. 9:43. I saw the bags. 4 black trash bags lined up along the porch railing, neatly, with the tops tied in bows. My clothes, my winter coat, with one arm folded against the plastic, like it was waving. On top of the nearest bag, taped down against the wind, was a note in my mother's handwriting. Not a letter. 1 sentence. It all stays in the family. 9:44. Movement behind the front window. Dale, in the living room. In Ruth's living room. With a tape measure in his hand. He saw me. I know he saw me. Because he stopped. And then he did something I will never forget as long as I live. He reached over, without hurry, and closed the curtain. Ruth's curtain. The one with the ivy pattern. She had hemmed herself. I did not pound on the door. I want you to understand that, because it matters for everything that comes after. I stood on that porch with a chuck roast going warm in the bag, and somewhere inside me a door closed too, quietly, on its own new lock. Screaming was what they were ready for. Screaming they could tell the neighbors about. I looked at the bright brass one more time, memorized it, the way you memorize a face, and then I loaded 4 trash bags into my car and drove away from the house, I had paid $116,560 to keep. I found out the rest within days from a probate filing my mother's lawyer sent. Probate is just the court process that sorts out what a person owned when they died. The filing said the house was not part of Ruth's estate at all because, and I had to read this part 3 times, Ruth had already transferred the house 2 years earlier to Carol. There was a deed on file at the county. It said, a deed on file at my county. If you have ever had the ground move under you, the specific vertigo of learning that a thing you lived inside of was legally rewritten while you were making dinner in it, then you know the next part. You do not cry, not yet. You go very quiet and very simple. Food, shelter, one foot, other foot. Before I tell you what I found in that deed, and I promise you, it is worth every minute you have spent with me so far. If this story has its hooks in you, this is a good moment to hit subscribe. Stories like mine take weeks to research and write, and that button is how you vote for more of them. All right. One foot, other foot. I did not go to my mother's condo. There was nothing behind that door for me, and there never had been. I slept on Yolanda's fold-out couch for 9 nights, and on the first night she did not give me advice, and did not give me a speech. She gave me a plate of oxtails and said, eat first, fight later. Then I rented a studio apartment above a laundromat on the west side, 400 square feet that smelled like other people's dryer sheets. And I will tell you something true. After the month I had lived, the sound of those machines through the floor was almost company. Here is where I compress time for you, because you already know I survive. You have seen where this ends, on a porch, with a key that turns. The rebuild was 14 months, and it was not a montage of triumph. It was a routine, but inside that routine, I made one decision that changed everything, and I made it in week 2, standing in my new 400 square feet, with the blue notebook in my hands. I decided to stop being a clerk who files documents and become an examiner who judges them. There is a certification for it. Title examination. The profession of reading every recorded document in a property's history in order and deciding whether the chain of ownership is clean or broken. Banks will not lend, and buyers cannot safely buy until someone like that says the title is good. I had 9 years of raw filing knowledge from the recorder's office. What I needed was the credential and the standing. So, nights and weekends, in a laundromat, scented studio, I studied chains of title, defective acknowledgments, the 200 ways a deed can look perfect and be poison. Every case study I read twice, once as a student, once as a locked-out granddaughter, and I am not ashamed to tell you that the anger was excellent fuel. Anger, refined properly, burns clean. 8 months after the morning of the locks, I passed my examination. 9 months after, a title insurance agency downtown called Keystone Land Title hired me as a junior examiner, and Yolanda took me to lunch and toasted me with sweet tea, and said she always knew the scanner. Crying girl had it in her. My salary went up by 1/3. My apartment did not change. My notebook gained a new column. And then, 11 months after the morning of the locks, on an ordinary Thursday at my new desk, a coworker mentioned a hot new listing on the east side, Delmore Avenue. $389,000. Open house Sunday. My mother was selling Ruth's house, which meant that somewhere, very soon, someone exactly like me was going to be asked to examine that title. Stay with me. This is where it changes. That Thursday evening, I did what any member of the public is allowed to do. I want to underline that because it matters to how this ends. Every document I am about to describe is a public record. I did not use my badge, my job, or anyone's password. I paid the county's copy fees like a stranger, and I sat in my car in the county parking garage, the same building where Yolanda taught me to read, with a folder of certified copies in my lap. Certified copies just means the county stamps them as true duplicates of what is on file. So a court will accept them. I opened the folder, and I read the paperwork of my own erasure, page by page. Page 1. The deed itself. A quitclaim deed. That is the simplest, bluntest kind of deed there is. A document that says, I give whatever I own of this property to you. No promises. No warranties. Recorded 2 years before the morning of the locks. In early spring, it transferred the house on Delmore Avenue from Ruth Brennan to Carol, her daughter, for the stated price of $1 plus. And this is real language that real documents use. Love and affection. $1. Love and affection. I am going to call this document what I called it in my head from that night on, the dollar deed. And there, at the bottom of the dollar deed, was my grandmother's signature, dated 11 days after her second stroke. 11 days after the stroke that took her signing hand. I sat in that parking garage and I looked at a signature, smooth, confident, looping, supposedly produced by a woman who, that same week, could not squeeze a pen hard enough to dent paper. I had watched her try. I had held the cup she could not hold. Whoever signed my grandmother's name signed it better than she had been able to sign it in years. They did not even study their victim. That was the moment my hands started shaking. And it was not fear. Page 2. The notarization on that deed, the stamp and signature swearing that Ruth appeared in person, was identified and signed willingly. The notary's name meant nothing to me. But a notary's stamp includes their commission expiration date, the date their state license runs out, and every commission is searchable in the Secretary of State's public database. I looked it up right there in the car, on my phone, holding my breath. That notary's commission had expired 8 months before the date on the deed. 8 months. 8 months. The stamp was dead when it hit the paper. In my profession, we would say the acknowledgement was fatally defective. In my grandmother's kitchen, we would have said it. A man with no license swore the state's oath over a signature my grandmother could not have made. Dale's poker buddy. My guy. For paperwork. He used to be a notary. He can still make things official. I had carried that sentence for 2 years, like a stone in a coat pocket. And in that parking garage, it finally dropped. I am going to call this piece of evidence the dead stamp. And then, 1 page further, in the same county file, the third thing. 3 weeks after the dollar deed was recorded, someone had filed a correction document, a little 1-page affidavit attempting to fix a scrivener's error, which is legal language for whoops, a clerical mistake. And what had they corrected? The date next to the notary's stamp. They had quietly moved it backward to a date when the commission would still have been alive. Think about what that little page confesses. You do not correct a date you never notice. Somebody looked at that stamp after the fact, understood exactly what was wrong with it, and instead of tearing the whole thing up, they tried to reset the clock and hoped nobody who could read would ever pull the file 1 page further. That is where guilt lives. Friends, never on the front page. Always 1 page further. I want to tell you what I did next, and I am not going to dress it up. I put the folder on the passenger seat, where Ruth used to sit when I drove her to the doctor, and I cried. Alone, in a concrete parking garage, on level 3, for about 10 minutes. The only time in this entire story. So let it count. I did not cry, because they stole a house. I cried because on some Tuesday 2 years earlier, while I was filing stranger's deeds 1 mile away, somebody had walked my grandmother, half her words gone. Her good hand curled around a stranger's pen she could not use. Through the theft of the only thing she had ever promised anyone. She had come home, tired. She had said one word to me. Paper. Hey, por. She was not asking for the notebook. She was reporting a crime, with the only word she had left, and I had brought her the wrong paper, and let it go. Then I wiped my face, opened the blue notebook to a clean page, and started a new ledger. Not of payments this time, of steps. That Sunday, 3 days after the parking garage, with the certified copies still riding on my passenger seat, the open house went ahead as scheduled, and I drove past it once. I want to be honest and say it was on my way to nowhere. Balloons on the porch, railing, where the trash bags had been, a folding sign in Ruth's yard, with my mother's realtor smiling out of it. Through the front window, I could see that they had staged the living room, which means they had rented furniture to replace Ruth's, because Ruth's furniture apparently did not photograph well. And past the rented sofa, I could see the curtain, the ivy curtain, still hanging, the one thing in the house too high up to bother stealing. The old me, the porch me, the trash bag me, wanted to park, walk in with the visitors, and take the tour of my own life with a guest name tag on. Instead, I slowed down just enough to watch one young couple walk up the steps, holding hands, excited, innocent, about to fall in love with a house whose paperwork was already counting down underneath them. I remember saying out loud, alone in the car, "Not your fault. You'll be fine." And they were. In a minute, you will see how the system I served caught them before the fall. Then, I drove on. You do not need to attend your own vindication. It attends you. Because here is the thing about being trained by the system that is about to be used against your family's lie. I knew, sitting in that garage, that I did not need to scream, threaten, or confront anyone. I did not need luck. I did not need my mother to confess. The documents had already confessed. All I had to do was follow procedure, so cleanly, that no lawyer alive could untangle her from her own filing. Step 1 happened at my own office, and it happened to me before I could make it happen. That Monday, a purchase contract came through on the Delmore Avenue listing. A young couple, first-time buyers, and their lender ordered title insurance through, of all the agencies in Columbus. Keystone, my employer. The file appeared in our queue with my grandmother's address on it, and I want you to know exactly what I did, because this is the part where a lesser story has me pull a clever trick. And the truth is better than a trick. I walked into my managing examiner's office, laid the order sheet on her desk, and said, I have a personal interest in this property and a legal claim against its title. I am disclosing the conflict and recusing myself completely. Recusing just means stepping away so your hands never touch it. She reassigned the file to our most senior examiner within the hour, and I never opened it, never read a note in it, never asked. I did not need to. Here is what I knew, that my mother did not. Any competent examiner, any of them, anywhere, on their worst day, pulls the full chain of title. The dollar deed was in that chain. The dead stamp was on the dollar deed. The correction affidavit was 1 page further, waving its arms. The defect was not hidden, treasure only I could find. It was a pothole in the middle of the road, and my mother had built her entire sale on the assumption that nobody would look down. Looking down is the job. Step 2. I hired my own attorney, a probate and property litigator, paid for out of 14 months of laundromat, apartment savings, and we filed 2 things with the court. First, a lawsuit called a quiet title action, which is exactly what it sounds like. It asks a judge to look at every claim on a property, decide who truly owns it, and silence the rest. Second, a notice called a lis pendens. Plain words. A public flag recorded against the property that tells the entire world this land is in active litigation. Buy it at your own peril. From the moment that flag hit the record, no title company in America would ensure that sale. No lender would fund it. And no buyer's attorney would let them within a mile of the closing table. I did not block my mother's sale with a scene. I blocked it with a filing fee and a stamp. Paper just waits, and that week, it stopped waiting. My mother found out the way I wanted her to find out. Not from me, from the machine. First, the senior examiner at Keystone finished his review and issued the finding any examiner would issue. Title defective. Chain broken, a quitclaim transfer. Defective acknowledgement. Active litigation flagged. Coverage declined. The underwriter. The company whose money actually stands behind a title policy refused to insure. The young couple's lender pulled the loan the same afternoon because banks do not lend against houses that courts might take back. The couple walked, as they should have, with their deposit returned in full. The only people in this story who did everything right and lost nothing. And the listing on Delmore Avenue quietly changed from pending back to nothing at all. Because the agent, once she understood what was recorded against that property, terminated the listing entirely. $389,000 evaporated off my mother's kitchen calendar. And I never raised my voice once. The voicemails started that Friday. I still have them. The first one was Syrup. Nadia, sweetheart. There has been some kind of clerical mix-up downtown. You work with these people. Be it all. The second one, 2 days later, had dropped the sweetheart. The third one informed me that I was destroying the family, that I had always been ungrateful, that Ruth would be ashamed of me. I want you to notice what none of the voicemails said. None of them said the deed is real. None of them said, your grandmother signed it. Guilty people do not defend the document. They audit your loyalty. I answered, nothing, and Dale came to the Keystone lobby once, in a golf shirt, entrepreneur voice on, asking to talk sense into me. And our office manager, bless her forever, told him examiners do not take walk-ins and offered him a mint. We met exactly once before the ruling. My mother and I, in a conference room at my attorney's office. For a mediation session she requested, both lawyers present. She came in wearing her funeral-grade sincerity, sat down across from me, and opened with, this is silly. Honey, it all stays in the family. I had waited 14 months to be in a room with her, and I had promised myself I would spend it like money I could never earn back. So, I did not argue. Arguing is for people whose paper is weak. I opened my folder, and I told her 5 things, numbered, in the flattest voice I own. 1. On the date you claim your mother signed the dollar deed. She was 11 days past the stroke that ended her ability to hold a pen. Her physicians documented it. I lived it. 2. The notary commission on that deed expired 8 months before the stamp was used. That is not my opinion. That is the Secretary of State's database, and it is attached as Exhibit B. 3. 3 weeks after recording, someone filed a correction, moving that stamp's date backward. That page does not fix your problem. Mom, that page proves you knew. 4. I tundifundetinte. Ruth's will, signed at a law office, properly witnessed, 5 years before her death, leaves the house to me. It was valid the day she signed it, and it is valid now. 5. I paid $1,240 a month on that house for 94 consecutive months. $116,560. That is more than 7 years of your condo payments, made by the person you left on the porch with trash bags. Every payment has a date, an amount, and a bank confirmation number, written in ink, in Grandma's format. In a notebook you packed into one of those bags yourself because you thought it was worthless. Then I closed the folder and said the only sentence I had actually rehearsed. You told me my whole life that it all stays in the family. I agree. I am the family it stays in. My mother looked at her lawyer. Her lawyer looked at the folder, and that, right there, a paid professional declining to meet his own client's eyes, was the closest thing to an apology I ever received. And honestly, it was better than one. The court's ruling came 13 months after the morning of the locks. I will give it to you the way my attorney gave it to me over the phone, because I wrote his words in the notebook while he said them. The quitclaim deed is declared void. A forged signature conveys nothing, and a dead stamp certifies nothing. The correction affidavit is disregarded as an attempted cure of a fraudulent instrument. The house on Delmore Avenue passes under Ruth Brennan's valid will to her granddaughter, the occupants, because Carol and Dale had actually moved themselves into that house while it sat unsellable. I suppose to feel like winners. The occupants have 30 days to vacate, and my mother is ordered to pay my legal costs, a little over $11,000, which I am told she is paying in installments, monthly. On the first, there is a poetry in the world that no writer would dare invent. The dead stamp had its own afterlife. The court referred the notarization to the Secretary of State and the county prosecutor, and the last I heard, Dale's guy for paperwork was explaining to investigators how his expired stamp crossed county lines 2 years after he stopped being anyone at all. And Dale was explaining what he paid him. I did not follow it closely. Some fires you light and walk away from, because tending them keeps you warm in the wrong way. Here is what I did not get, and I want to be honest with you about it, because videos like this, one, lie at the ending more than anywhere else. I did not get a family back. There was no tearful phone call, no holiday reconciliation. My mother's last message months later was a long email with the subject line, "Family is everything that contained her side, her wounds, her reasons," and I searched it twice. Not one sentence of apology, and not one mention of Ruth's hand. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, and then I filed it in a folder named Read Once. And I have kept that promise. But one thread came back to me, and it was the right one. My half-brother, Ruth's Saturday card partner, 21, now caught his whole life between his parents and the truth, showed up on Delmore Avenue the weekend I moved back in. He did not explain his parents, and I did not ask him to carry them. He carried boxes instead. And at the end of the day, he handed me a paper bag, embarrassed, and inside was Ruth's old spare key, the kitchen drawer key, the one my mother had asked about at the funeral. On the faded ribbon Ruth used to loop around her wrist. He had lifted it off his mother's counter months earlier. He admitted, before he even understood why, it felt like it should be at the house. He said, "He loses at cards to me now, most Saturdays." Ruth would call that the estate properly distributed. So, the morning of the new key, you were there with me at the beginning, the brass turning on the first try. 14 months late. Here is the part I did not tell you. Before I unpacked a single box that day, I sat down at Ruth's kitchen table, in Ruth's chair for the first time in my life, and I opened the blue spiral notebook to the 94th line, the last payment, the one I wrote 5 weeks before the locks, and underneath it, in ink, in her format, I wrote one final entry, date, amount owed, 0, and in the memo column, 2 words, paid in full. For 7 years and 10 months, I thought that notebook was a record of what the house cost me. I had it backward. It was a record of what I was worth, kept in my own hand, the way Ruth taught me, because she knew exactly what was coming and exactly who would need proof. Paper has a better memory then people. People lie. Paper just waits. It waited 94 lines for me. The notebook lives in the drawer by the stove now, next to Ruth's, retired at last. The dollar deed is void. The dead stamp is evidence in someone else's worse year. And the key hangs on Ruth's ribbon on a nail by the door, where I see it every time I leave and every time I come home. It has stopped being the thing they changed on me. It is the thing that turned. My mother was right about one thing, all those years, and I let her keep it. It all stays in the family. She just never checked the paperwork on who the family was. If you carried something like this, the payments nobody counted, the caregiving nobody saw, the lock that changed overnight, put the word key in the comments and tell me one line of your story if you can. I read them all, usually with coffee, at Ruth's table. Subscribe if you want the next story, because there is always a next story. Families like mine make sure of it. Take care of your paper, take care of your people, and make sure the ones you trust can tell the difference. Thanks for staying with me. The roast, by the way. I finally cooked it, low and slow. It was perfect.